Penguin Random House Audio presents The Lonely Hunter, How Our Search for Love is Broken, a Memoir. This is the author, Aimée Lutkin. Dedicated to the memory of my grandmother, Carmen Aquilone, and the presence of my mother, Pamela Enns. Introduction. When can I say I'll be alone forever? It was late in fall, long past the invigorating joys of vivid foliage. The clocks had been set back, and naked branches raked gray skies. There was still a long tunnel of darkness ahead before the twinkling lights of the holidays would emerge and illuminate a more cheerful atmosphere. These transitions were as familiar to me as the Brooklyn street I was walking down, carrying a bottle of wine in a black and silver striped bag, also familiar. The sensation of counting the days until the next thing, and then the next thing, was how I paced my life, with no expectations of more than what I already knew. I knew the texture of the sidewalk, now with brown leaves ground into its porous cracks, the places where it bucked over tree roots. It led me to the door of a brownstone protected by a heavy, practically medieval gate hung with an actual bell that I'd rung many times. I rang it again. The brownstone housed a cooperative of 6 or 7 people, depending on who was in town. I'd been invited to a dinner party, and I'd arrived a few minutes before the hour it was supposed to start. When I walked into the kitchen, nothing had begun to happen that would result in a meal, so I kicked off my shoes and sat at the dining room table, opening the $10 bottle of wine and chatting with my friend Xavier, who'd opened the door. He'd come down from the upstairs living room a little flustered and sweaty, saying he'd been dancing by himself to shake off a bad mood. The rhythms of this interaction were pleasant. It was another night in my uneventful life, a night that I imagined would be swept away along with so many others. Some members of the cooperative and other less foolishly punctual guests slowly assembled in the kitchen, opening and closing cabinets, moving a stack of plates from a shelf to a table, volunteering for a deli beer run, until finally a feast was prepared. It was a nice dinner, and by the end, sated and a little buzzed, we turned the conversation to love. One of my fellow diners asked me, "So what's going on in your life with romance?" This is not an unusual question, and it wouldn't have been particularly memorable either, except that I was feeling unguarded and open after consuming so much home-cooked food and booze. So I answered honestly and said, "I don't really know if I'm going to date anyone ever again." The friend who had asked, Rachel, was recently engaged. Her fiancé John was sitting at the table too. I'd been friends with John long before I'd met Rachel, but she'd made an impression. They dated when they were much younger and had broken up. About 8 months before this dinner party, John had emailed her out of the blue to say she'd appeared to him in a dream. Usually, if someone tells you they just had a dream about you, it's a euphemism for wanting to have sex. With John, I really believed it. He had an otherworldly aura, an angelic calmness that soothed everyone around him. He was the sort of person you could imagine moseying through the landscape of dreams, checking in on old lovers to see if the fruit of a relationship had finally ripened. They went on the second first date of their 2 relationships, and this time love stuck. They would be married in a few months in the same house we were all having dinner in with the permission of their many roommates. Almost before I had finished my sentence, Rachel was rolling her eyes, responding with the dismissiveness of someone who had recently been plucked from singleness by a dream walker. "Of course you will," she said, shaking her head. My throat constricted, a kind of tightening that happens when I'm compelled to say something that will make me feel more upset than relieved. "I think there's this idea that everyone finds someone eventually," I managed. "And I just think realistically there's no reason that would be true. Some people are just alone forever." A ripple of reaction went around the table. In turn, everyone denied that I was facing the rest of my life alone. Xavier, who was currently dating a woman in an open marriage, 2 friends of Rachel's, completely unrelated women who looked like they came from the same wholesome outdoorsy family, and a new red-headed roommate named Scott, whom I'd met mere moments before. He had taken a seat at the table during dessert to go through the household mail and weigh in on my love life. "Have you heard of Tinder or OkCupid?" Scott demanded, clenching the pile of bills. He was recently affianced too, and clearly secure in his belief that everyone gets there eventually. "Yeah, I've tried both, but I didn't meet anyone," I said, sounding pathetic even to myself. He threw up his hands in an exasperated gesture as though this were a long-standing argument between us, and he was sure I was just obstinately opposed to dating. Scott turned back to the mail, done with my unrepentant stubbornness. Xavier was a little quieter. I guess that being in a relationship with someone who was already married had made him more aware of the challenges facing modern daters. His girlfriend didn't keep him a secret, but her husband wasn't thrilled with the arrangement. They still sometimes hung out as a group, going to summer events at the Prospect Park bandshell and having dinners. I'd bumped into them in line for a screening of The Triplets of Belleville, a threesome navigating polyamory with the awkwardness of a coffee date. The overall theme of the responses at the table that night was cliched reassurance. There's a lid for every pot. Everyone who thinks they're never going to meet someone right then. It's when you're least expecting it, boom, love happens. If only that were true. How many varying states of expectation I'd lived in. Sure, unsure, pretending to be unsure, hopeful, determined, entitled, defeated. No attitude had worked law of attraction style to bring love my way. My current state was acceptance, a word associated with grief. It can also mean that you're dealing with reality as best you can. I was 32 years old. In the last 6 years, I'd had sex once, somewhere around year 3. A quick fling in the midst of all that abstinence hadn't been the end of a drought. It was more like a mirage in the desert, briefly convincing me I was about to be saved from the unrelenting tread across burning, sexless sand. In a way, my singlehood was just as baffling to me as it was to everyone else at the dinner table. I wasn't going to be cast as the lead on a sexy CW show anytime soon, but I wasn't unattractive. I wasn't shy. I wasn't unpleasant, whatever you may think after hearing this. I had many friends and deep connections. There seemed to be plenty of other single people who could say the same, but somehow, none of them were the right fit. 1 year single had turned into another, then another. Time had flown by, summer to fall to winter, with no spring romances. Without planning it, I'd become a spinster. Unlike my friends, I'd had some time to acclimate to the current state of no affairs. I'd learned to shop in small quantities, to eat at restaurants alone, to arrive at special events without a +1. It was fine. It was absolutely fine until I had to explain what was going on with my love life to a bunch of people who actually had love lives. Each person in the room had lived through a moment when they thought they'd never meet anyone. They'd been proven wrong. They were certain, looking at me, that I was just them in the past, in that moment before. Soon, sooner than I could imagine, I'd be in the after. I just had to wait and be patient, because my special someone was coming as fast as they could. The conversation at the dinner table circled. They were progressive folks, non-judgmental, kind, open-minded, but what I was saying about my life made them too unsettled to really listen. Or maybe no one wanted to agree with, yeah, you're right, no one will ever love you. When Rachel repeated, no one ends up alone forever, I finally shrugged and said, yeah, I know, so we could talk about anything else. The group started clearing the table and doing dishes, moving on to other subjects. I felt exposed and out of place, like I was sitting at the table topless and everyone was pretending not to notice. Tears welled and I swallowed them. Gamely, I asked if anyone wanted tea and got up to fill the kettle. The sense of enjoying another typical, forgettable night had been disrupted, and I suspected, even then, I would remember this conversation for a long time. Being alone wasn't so difficult to contend with. Yes, sometimes it was hard. Sometimes I wished I had someone to bring to holiday gatherings, to split the rent, to spoon me on the couch on a rainy day. But more often, being single wasn't the defining characteristic of my existence, which contained all sorts of delightful things. Friendships, hobbies, parties, lazy weekend mornings, 2 long-haired cats, and the ability to make my own schedule without checking anyone else's. The hardest part of being single wasn't the quality of my life. It was really this lack of language to articulate the meaning of my own solitude, as I saw it long-term. What is so scary about someone saying they might spend their life alone, especially for people in relationships? Love and relationships are often a marker of time. Forever is a concept we associate with love, though love was theoretically as tenuous as my single state. Like being single, being a couple can end any second, but we definitely don't look to the end of a relationship the same way people hope for the end of singleness. Instead, the calendar of human events is built around partnership, the ceremonious connection of families, anniversaries, children, the cost of housing or health care or the inevitability of taxes, a promise of care in old age or of bringing a guest to other people's weddings, or even receiving an invitation to events and vacations upstate populated only by your coupled friends. The patches of ground where our bones will lie are often bought in pairs. Nearly everything prioritizes 2 over 1. Some of these things are admittedly petty, but others are a matter of survival. When I said I think I might be alone forever, people in relationships could be hearing something much more threatening, something about how insubstantial these support structures really are. I was suggesting that we don't find...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?